Welcome to another episode of my podcast. Today we're going to be talking about misogyny, and in my previous podcast, part one, we were talking about misandry. Misandry is hatred toward men, and I told you that we cannot separate two of these terms. I think misogyny is super tied to misandry, but it has so much more history than misandry. The reason that I wanted to describe this in one podcast is because I think you can't understand the full picture of where did it start and why men felt threatened of women, and it had become at a rise of feminism wave, and then later exploded into Me Too movement, and white men, they felt threatened because of this whole idea that every man is an enemy. And the reason is pretty simple. Misogyny was there for thousands of years, not even centuries, but for thousands of years. If we're talking about misandry, where man realized that right at the end of the 19th century, this whole idea came up, and there were a couple words spreading in some newspapers like, we were threatened, women getting so much power, and many, many more. Then with misogyny, the term reappeared in 17th century. It's quite early, but women, they felt threatened and they felt like they had no rights. And by all rights, I mean no rights. I think 17th century, why this whole thing reappeared, is because of church, plague, and I guess witch hunt, because it was probably this period of time. If you're interested, I'm going to leave down in the description box a link where you can check out my podcast about plague. It's pretty interesting, in witch hunt. That is the main reason why a lot of women died in this witch hunt. Not only women, men as well, but I guess 80 or even 90% of the so-called witches were women. And a lot of misogynists, such as men, they hated women, they participated in the stripes. Let's talk about misogynist or misogyny itself. Again, this is a Greek word, ancient Greek word, where masses means hatred, and Jane, I guess. Jin, probably. I don't know, guys, I'm sorry. Means women. Hatred toward women. That is the main reason why I would start with misandry and misogyny at this point, because the comparison is pretty simple. It's kind of like Greek word. Both of these originated in Greece basically, but both of these words reappeared in different times. And when, I guess, one sex felt threatened than the other one. Okay, let's finally talk about the beginning of the nature, and when women flourished and were dominating at some point. Peasants, they believed in many gods, and they believed that nature is very related to women, that women were associated with giving birth, with life and fruitful years. That is the main reason why women meant everything back in the day. But as you can tell, men felt threatened. Not even threatened, but of course we know the physiological, I guess, advantage of man, that most of the time muscles, they're more built than women's muscles. And of course they went on hunting and bringing some food, providing for the whole tribe. And pretty logical to assume that men would try to take charge of the tribe and take charge of women and as well as kids. That's why they participated in wars and still participate most of the time in wars. That's why they're taking care of women. They're providing everything needed. That is the main reason why the patriarchy came up, and men, they realized that they wanted to be in charge of everything. If they're providing, then they're probably taking charge. And of course, most of you know that religion was born. I'm not talking about many god religion. I'm talking about one god in particular. It's Buddhism, it's Muslims, it's Catholic Church. Every single religion has one thing in common, that if we're talking about God, it's going to be man. So what is weird about this policy? I'm not going to subject religion. I'm not going to subject faith itself. It's very interesting that, in my opinion, the Holy Spirit and God itself can't be a man, but always pictured as a man. And you can see this through books, history, art, everywhere men pictured God as a man. But I don't really think Holy Spirit has any sex. It just a spirit. That is a substance that we have around us. Of course, it's probably not having any genitalias. It's the way to show, I guess, people that, well, if a god is a man, then man has to be in charge and women has no power. And of course, a lot of the times you can see through centuries and thousands of years of experience in art again, that women were not always only suppressed by men and killed by men. Sometimes we can call it femicide, where women were killed like witch hunt in 17th century. During plague, I would say the worst part in all of it is through the art, I'd say, you can tell that women were not only demonized, but shown as a sin. Do you remember whenever you go to church? I don't really know about Catholics, but what I know about Orthodox, because I am kind of like a participant of Orthodox Church. Whenever you have your period, you can go to church. If we're going to talk about women, they can go to church without a hat or something to cover their head. Women cannot wear any makeup. Women cannot go to church without a skirt. They always have to be in skirt. And only later, I guess, a couple of 10 or maybe 20 years, we finally can see these restrictions falling down and women are allowed to wear makeup without lipstick, because if you kiss an icon, then you might leave some stains, as well as you might not really cover your head with something in particular. It can be just some hat. And you might not even wear a skirt, just get something over your pants and you're good to go. That is the main reason why I was always curious and I always asked my grandma when we went to church, why do women have to do all of it and men shouldn't? I mean, my dad, if he really wanted to go to church, he didn't need to do anything. Of course, makeup, it's not a case here, but he didn't need to cover his head. He didn't need to put anything around his pants. He just had to go there. And why am I not allowed to go with my period? I understand that at some point, because when church, people had no underwear and women had to go to church and they had period, they might have left some red stains behind them, and that is the main reason probably they were restricted. But at the same time, I don't understand why animals were not allowed to go to church, though they're creatures of a god. A lot of restrictions, a lot of questions that probably cannot be answered. But when I told you that, one thing in particular is in common, that all of these figures, all of these sane people, most sane people were men. I would say by that statement as church and religion, a lot of kingdoms and government, I would say, back in the day, maybe it wasn't a government, but some tribes and leadership, they took control over not only women, but everyone around. And they knew that this can be treated as, like, if you go against God, then you're going to be eliminated. And most of the time, it related in some point to women. They were sinful. I mean, men, they could go around, have multiple families, and have no consequences for that. But if a woman was somewhere, having promiscuous life, she could have, people could kill her, and for a reason that she had a promiscuous lifestyle, and they could throw some stones in her, and that was crazy. Not only back in the day, but yes, women were suppressed for such a long period of time. That is the reason why I think when men were complaining about misogyny, well, they were not suppressed for as long as women were. And as a consequence of these actions through history, we can see the suppression of men. I don't really say and think it's normal, it's okay to do that. No, because we're still going back history, backward. If we were suppressing women for all the centuries and thousands of years, it doesn't give us any right to do the same thing to men. I mean, then we're going to have equals to be equal to each other and try to suppress men in return. I don't really think it's going to work, not in 21st century, but this is what important to understand, that women were waiting for such a long period of time to get to feminism. And misogyny came up only that harsh and in that, men really felt threatened only in 1970s during the second wave of feminism. And that was the main reason why feminism was related to misogyny, that men were threatened. Okay, the worst part is when I see social media, and not only social media, but a lot of TikTokers and maybe even YouTubers talking about misogyny and saying like, I have no right, I can't find a job, and I think that there are no equal rights for me and whatever. But there's so much more to that, and that is a weird part, that misogyny has become a sort of trend in TikTok and any other platforms instead of a real problem that has to be dealt with. For example, let's talk about a very important aspect of misogyny, that still there's human traffic, there's still a lot of cases with SH, and there's a lot of cases of attacking activists, especially a lot of women that were trying to protect females and fighting against some rules, probably against mistreatment. They were the targets of misogyny and specifically femicide. And this is scary. In 21st century, there can be a person that targets another one just because this another one activist is trying to protect someone's rights. And this is not okay, and it still has place in modern society, which I totally disagree with. Another great example, not great in a way, oh, it's so good, a great example in a way that you can understand what I'm talking about real misogyny. China, 20th century, and the real problem started, I guess, around 70s, maybe 80s, and communism was at a rise. The whole Mao Zedong, I guess, leadership went to the point where China always loved sex. Okay, for centuries they had books, they had a lot of different, I don't know, articles, how to pleasure your partner, and they literally were into sex. And then all of a sudden in 20th century, new communist party, new communism ruling, I guess, came over and said sex is bad. You can't have sex. And whenever women had sex with multiple partners or with more than one partner, not only women, but most of the time women, people were allowed to come and throw a stone or kind of like kick her for being smelly and dirty as the shoes she was wearing on her neck. So 20th century, guys, we're talking about recent years. Then, of course, you remember the policy of one family, one child, or at least 2 children. For quite a long period of time, China had a lot of people. The population was crazy back then, 2 billion if I'm mistaken. And of course, government was concerned how to prevent that much birth and that much population growth. That's why they came up with a brilliant idea, in quotes, it's not brilliant as well, to femicide girls. Frankly speaking, I guess it's probably not the way like they were literally killing girls, but they always favored boys in families instead of girls. And when girls were born, not even born, but shown as some sort of like, when a woman was pregnant and she was pregnant with a girl, there was a lot of abortions, or a lot of these girls went missing when they were born. That is the main reason why government was focusing not only on boys, but on preventing any future kids. That's why they try to make sure that if you have more than 2 kids, then you're going to pay a huge fine. And if a woman was pregnant with a 3rd baby, then the possibility that their own tribe, their own village, their own citizens, they're going to push this woman into an abortion or maybe make her to have a dead child. So that was really, really scary. And the whole policy started again in 70s, maybe 80s, and went through to the early, I guess, 2000s, maybe 2010, or something like that. And of course, for 40 years, the population decreased dramatically. And that was really good. It worked in favor of China. But what happened next? A lot of girls now weren't born. And there's a new agenda, there's a new problem that there's not enough girls that's going to give you birth. There's so much boys, there's so much men. In a lot of villages in China, they consist only of men, because with the demand on girls, they have to pay. Now boys have to pay to get married and to get this wife and find her and pay her family or this girl up to $35,000 to get married, because it's a deficit of women in China. And another great problem that these girls, they don't really want to give birth because they're not protected with government. This information I picked from a YouTuber. I can't tell her name, unfortunately, but she's a Chinese, and she described this problem with population and decrease of birth in China due to these problems. That is the main reason why, guys, a lot of, and I can prove this information, not even prove, but tell you that it's 100% true information. Because of this shortage of girls and women due to this femicide and misogyny, unfortunately, not only villages were left with no girls and men only, boys only. That was the main reason why they had to buy girls from other countries, Asian countries most of the time. Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, and many, 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 many more. Where girls are kidnapped from their parents most of the time. Or Chinese, human traffic workers, they purchase kids for insignificant price, like $100, I guess maybe now more than that, and they purchase those girls. The worst case of scenario, again, talking about misogyny, this girl is going to come in this village, and all this men, they're going to use her. And when she dies from this usage, I'd say, they just buy a new one, and they save some money. The whole village is saving money, and they purchase this girl. I got this information from, I worked for an embassy, and I worked for an Asian embassy. A lot of Chinese were in the blacklist. They were in a list of dangerous people who were participating in human traffic, which is super scary that in 21st century it's still happening. And they told me that it's totally true. And when I watched one of those YouTube gurus or like YouTube blogger talking about Chinese, she said the same thing. One of the recent cases, they broke internet a couple of years ago, again, femicide and misogyny, when one of the women was found during winter. She was found in a small house with a chain on her neck, and she gave birth to 8 kids. She was sold 3 times, different villages in different regions of China, or maybe even 5 times. And when she was sold the third, I guess, or second time, she just got mad. and that's it. And a lot of question was raised, how did Chinese government allow a mad person or insane person to get married? Because it is restricted, at least in Russia. In China, it is restricted. In so many other countries, it is restricted. You can't marry a person who has mental illness. But it wasn't a problem. That is the main reason why I would say that is pretty recent case. If we're talking about misogyny and when women are complaining about their rights not getting a job, I don't really think that I have any right to say which problem is serious and which one is not. Of course, I understand the Chinese problem is so much worse in case of slavery and human traffic, but I don't want to minimize the seriousness of a problem of mistreatment SH in other countries that still exist. And when I tried to give you an example of You from the previous podcast in the series where Joe Goldberg, he said, yeah, misogyny is finally working in his favor. That is the weirdest part, that Bronte, she did absolutely nothing wrong. She tried to catch Joe Goldberg for everything he'd done to women through all the seasons, and he was killing women, and she tried to find justice. But at the same time, she was accused in pitting two guys against each other, and that's why men were literally hunting her. And this is a full-blown femicide, where just a woman was threatened by others, and if she had even something to do with that, it doesn't give anyone right to treat her, like to punish her or treat her as a person who deserves, beating or killing or whatever. That is the weirdest part that still exists. So yeah, the main targets of femicide, those are feminism activists, and most of the time it's going to be women. Unfortunately, not every single, unfortunately, the basic part of all is misogyny sometimes can be related to one sex, not the opposite sex to each other, but women can hate other women as well. I don't know why, but it can be pretty simple. For example, some crazy mom gives birth to a kid, and it's going to be a man or small boy. And there were a lot of cases where this woman, like, I hate my future son's wife just because he's mine. I don't want to share him with anyone else. David Gilmer is an anthropologist. When he was discussing misandry versus misogyny, he said that misogyny, and I talked about this in my previous podcast, misogyny is basing on the fact that it's a feminine sex. So people just hate women for being women. Where misandry, it's more than hatred towards sex. It's more like the hatred toward traditional roles in society, that men have a little bit more power and advantage in modern world than women. That is the main reason why it's so much different, because a lot of women, they're not protected, and still, if we're talking about other countries, if a woman picks not even career, but picks to stay at home and take care of kids, she's not going to be paid, she's not going to be treated in a way that she's respected, and it always takes for granted. When if a man stays at home and spends time with kids, it's like he's a hero, he's a dead hero. That is a difference in mindset that probably has been created through centuries and thousands of years, and again through art, music, and different films, and many more. It's still really, really harsh. Guys, I want to finish today's podcast with words from anthropologist David D. Gilmour. We talked about him a couple of minutes ago. He argues that misogyny is rooted in men's conflicting feelings, men's existential dependence on women for procreation, and men's fear of women's power over them in their time of male weakness, contracted against the deep-seated needs of men for the love, care, and comfort of women, a need that makes the man feel vulnerable. And that is so weird in a way that men, they love women, and a lot of men, they are willing to protect and sacrifice everything for their women. But there's a conflict that they're given too much power to their women, and they're becoming threatened that they're going to lose this power. And of course, for men that have, again, we talked about that, a little bit different muscle build, they're different. We can't deny this fact that men are stronger. 90 or 95% men are stronger than women. And I'm talking about body and muscles. That is the main reason why they're so afraid to lose their leadership, and they're so afraid to lose to women. And they try to define these terms as like woman and feminism and misogyny. They think that they have to punish some women for their right to understand who's better and who's a leader in modern society. So yeah, guys, I'm sorry, but it's still, we have this problem now. It's still there. I do believe in misandry. I do believe in misogyny, that they exist. Unfortunately, we live in so many different conferences and debates, social media, protests. It still exists. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. that was a serious topic that I wanted to bring up, and I think that it was really important to tell you guys that it's not always that easy as it sounds. And I'm going to see you in my next podcast. That's fine with me. Bye bye.